Welcome, everybody, to an edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. It is great to be with you today. We're doing this at a little bit of an unusual time for us. We usually do stuff in the morning on East Coast time. So make sure to share this with folks, get it out there so people know that we're having this conversation today, which I am really looking forward to. Very excited to welcome Nora Barrows-Friedman to the show. We have not had her on before, and I'm a big fan, as I know that many of the folks who listen to or watch Millennials Are Killing Capitalism are as well. And we have a lot of things we're going to talk about. We'll talk about, some of the current events kind of thing, a little bit of analysis. And we'll also talk a little bit about Nora's like background and history, because I think many people know her. She's been doing media work for decades at this point. But you know, the live streams that Electronic Intifada has every Thursday, I think, have become such a staple for folks, especially over the last 22 months or so. And I think that has obviously introduced her to new people who may not know her background as well. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, talk about the book that she wrote, In Our Power, and just also discuss we'll have some fun too along the way, I'm sure. We both are now members. She was from the beginning with Tanky Group Therapy, but I'm a newer member. And so I'm sure it'll have a little bit of a Tanky Group Therapy vibe at some point in this conversation. So anyway, look forward to it. Make sure to, again, like, share, subscribe. Also, there is a discount code, I believe, I'll double check in a second, in the YouTube show description for Patreon for this month, 30% off. So if people are not supporting us on Patreon yet, it's a great way to do so. And of course, support Samir Project and other mutual aid efforts in Palestine, please. Um, all right. With that, I'll just say quickly, and Nora will correct me on any of this if it's dated, but Nora Barrows-Friedman is a staff writer and associate editor at the Electronic Intifada and is the author of In Our Power, U.S. Students Organized for Justice in Palestine. She hosts, along with her other associate editors and comrades, the Electronic Intifada Livestreams that we all watch on Thursdays at noon Eastern Time. So Nora, welcome to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. It's good to be with you.
Oh my God, it's so good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm a longtime listener, first time caller. And I just, yeah, it's a big honor. Thank you so much.
Well, the honor is mine, totally. I mean, I'm really excited to have you. Look forward to this and really, really appreciate the work that you've been doing for a long time. And so it's long overdue. And yeah, glad to have you. And
Thanks.
thank you for the kind words about our platform too.
It's the best.
So let's see, where do we start? I have to pull up my notes. Um, I think what we wanted to start with is talking a little bit about like kind of how you got involved in kind of media work. I think you referenced that. I don't remember what this was. Maybe it was even actually on a Tanky Group Therapy session recently. You talked about like starting at like 16 or something like that as some kind of internship. I know that you worked at KPFA, which is a big outlet in the Bay Area. Um, and obviously, you've been with Electronic Intifada for a long time now. Also, just reading a little bit of your book, you've been doing Palestine organizing since undergrad, it sounds like. So just maybe share a little bit of that kind of journey for you into, left media work, Palestine solidarity, and so on.
Ugh. I always get like talking about myself. But yeah, like you said, I was born and raised in Berkeley, California. I still live in the Bay Area. And when I was a sophomore in high school, these ultra cool older kids came to do a presentation on a budding new media training project called Youth Radio that was being kind of formed out of public radio people in the Bay Area and affiliated with KPFA. And so I thought it would be pretty cool, and I joined, and I was trained as a radio producer and editor and news reporter. We'd take our little, like, back then nothing was digital because it was the early 90s. And we had our big, tape recorders, and we'd go out and interview people and kind of, come back and learn how to edit and produce radio stories. And I loved it. And I became a peer teacher after my training and was at youth radio for a couple of years. And then I was an intern at a big hip hop radio station here in the Bay Area when I was about a senior in high school. And so I was just kind of like around the radio world here, and I loved it. I loved being able to, call anybody, you wanted, and ask them about what was going on in the world. And then in 2003, I got an internship at KPFA after taking a few years off to have a kid and do some, kind of random work just to pay rent and pay the bills and put my kid through preschool, yada yada. So 2003, I walked into KPFA and I managed to persuade Dennis Bernstein at Flashpoints, the investigative news magazine there, to give me an internship. And my internship was March 2003, which was the first day was I think the day after Rachel Corrie was murdered in Gaza. And it was also the first day of the Bush administration's shock and awe campaign, and during the first few phases of the invasion and subsequent occupation of Iraq. So that's kind of where I started. I grew up in an anti-war, radical, left-wing, bohemian household. Luckily, my parents they split when I was little, but they had both been very just anti-Zionist, and so I didn't grow up around a lot of Zionism at all, which I think is really lucky. Like, it was just very I don't know, it could have been a lot worse for sure, and so it just kind of informed my anti-war leanings. And I was in my early 20s when the Iraq war started, and I was just livid that this was happening, and at the same time, the second intifada in Palestine was in full swing, and it just felt like we were entering a new world, one that I didn't want my baby daughter at that point to have to deal with. And so, that's I was at KPFA for almost 9 years, and then I guess 8 years. And then in 2010, I got a job as an editor at the Electronic Intifada, and that is where I've been ever since. So this is my 16th year at EI, which is an incredible privilege.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful, and you do great work there.
Thank you.
As do your colleagues.
Yeah.
So I mentioned you published your book. I'll raise it up for folks to look at, but it's called In Our Power, U.S. Students Organize for Justice in Palestine. And you wrote this in 2014. Yeah. So, this is 11 years ago at this point. We've had obviously a lot of organizing around Palestine since that movement has grown a lot. And then, of course, Tufan al-Aqsa in 2023, there's, necessarily all this kind of new energy that has been infused within the student movement for Palestine. Um, and it's interesting. I wanted you to just kind of reflect a little, if you would, about like what it was kind of like in those phases that you were looking at it versus now. One of the things that was interesting just looking at the book is how a lot of the tactics used to repress it were the same as what we see now. So like you write in the book about the use of like the civil rights acts and stuff like that to say that these students are doing anti-Semitism basically, and that this can't go on because it's creating an unsafe or a hostile environment for Jewish students. And so I found that interesting to see like, oh, like that argument was already there in like 2012, 2013 or
Yeah.
whatever. Um, but yeah, just talk a little bit about kind of the then and now and what I know that you continue to follow this also with EI. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, not a lot has changed in terms of what students have been and still are up against in terms of, administrative repression, repression by outside Israel lobby organizations. This attempt to brand any and all criticism of not just Israel and its crimes, but the administration's ties to those crimes, through research grants and, investments and whatever. Trying to brand all of that as, hostile to Jewish students or Judaism in general. It's always been a very boring um, attempt. It's so insidious and um, it's so cynical. Um, but this is a tried and tested method of trying to silence dissent on college campuses. The measures of repression, I think, were just as bad. But it's just been, I think, more amplified in the last couple of years, since the genocide began in October 2023, where these administrations or these lobby groups or politicians, at the very, very top, are now paying more attention to what's happening on college campus, what has been happening on college campuses, um, and not in a, oh, we should protect students' right to free speech way, but we should crack down on these students as brutally as possible. Um, and so that the repression has escalated, and it has um, really kind of revealed everything that students have been saying for decades about the prioritizing by administrations of their, precious research grants, of the interests of their board of trustees members, of their donors. These were all things students were saying way back in 2010, when I kind of first started reporting on the student movement. Um, but I mean, just what's happening at Columbia, lately, is really, I mean, it's everythh that the students there had been saying for so long, where it's more, Columbia is acting more like a hedge fund than it is an institution for higher education. And they are so willing and so ready and so enthusiastic about throwing their students and their members of faculty under the bus in order to placate or please their donors, or in order to um, placate or please, the White House, that they're even okay with, sharing information about their students to ICE, and more than happy to see their students being kidnapped, abducted, and detained by ICE. It is incredibly revolting, and it is also incredibly revealing. And yeah, I mean, the way that that these administrations are just rolling over. Um, it's it's kind of extraordinary to see, but it's not shocking because this is what administrations have been doing for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the hedge fund comment is so apt because I think that's essentially what universities are at this point, is that they're, the leadership of universities are placed and controlled to sort of manage a portfolio of assets essentially and
Yeah,
try to increase kind of, I mean, it's wild because, you know, that shouldn't be the case. I mean, what does managing a portfolio of assets really have to do with higher education? Doesn't have anything to do with it. And you can understand, I guess, on some level, something like, there's the whole debate around, you know, like Colombia has been interesting for a long time because of the relationship to gentrification and real estate, and all
yeah,
of this and the encroachment into Harlem, basically, and the gentrification. And a lot of universities have that kind of relationship, which is quite a nefarious aspect of universities. On some level, you say, well, universities need nice buildings and they need like, so there's like a certain aspect of the logic that you could kind of understand to some extent, but the way that it has become so over determining in the way that these universities operate, not just in a kind of unethical relationship to the cities and the surrounding residents, but also to just, yeah, not like really regulating. Fred Moten talks about universities as sites of the regulation of thought rather than
yeah,
the proliferation of thought, and I think that we see that so clearly right now. All the work that the university is doing, and the government is doing, and the way that they're kind of dovetailing there to regulate the thought, to say you actually can't think these things, you can't study about these things, like, and yeah, I mean, it's fascistic for
yeah,
sure,
of
and
course.
it is very revealing in this time.
Yeah, and it's wrapped in this, again, this like liberal or neoliberal veneer of like, all the brochures at Columbia or even UC Berkeley or, Rutgers, whatever. They're all, they all have this language that they use of like a place where, students of all backgrounds can come and feel safe and learn and debate and challenge assumptions and all of this, kind of very appropriated language. And then when the students actually have the privilege of being enrolled in a four-year college and they're about to be, what is it, $300,000 in debt for a bachelor's degree, right? They have the privilege of going in debt for these places. They are it's entrapment. I mean, they're sanctioned, they're punished, they are, there's like a chilling effect, essentially, especially in these like Ivy League places where, now at Columbia and Barnard and NYU, you can't even say Zionist or Zionism. You can't even, like, in a critical way, because they're now codifying this like definition of Zionism, which is like a protected identity sort of class. It's not like like it should be, which is a choice. It's a choice to be Zionist. It's a choice to be a racist. It's a choice to be a supremacist. But they've been working. They've been working very closely with these Israel lobby and Zionist lobby organizations to really codify this definition of Zionism as like a victimized, protected identifier, which is, it just throws all academic inquiry and critical reasoning and everything that these students are supposed to be able to like, inhibit and express, completely out the window. And so students, come into these universities thinking that they're gonna, learn things, and instead they're being told that they can't even think about criticizing the perpetrators of the greatest crime of our generation, because people's feelings might get hurt. It's absolutely like astounding that this is happening. But again, this is what liberalism has gotten us.
It's really, yeah, that's so interesting, and you're right. One of the things you made me think about when you were talking about that, the whole idea of like debate and the free speech, because of course the same groups who were promoting that when, like, there was the big thing of like all these white supremacists that would come to campuses a few
Right.
years ago, right? And people would get together and anti-fascists would try to stop them from being able to speak, these like kind of like shock jock, anti-trans type speakers, like all
Yeah.
this kind of stuff. And that a lot of the institutions that were behind that movement were also deeply Zionist. And it made sense because it was sort of like this coalition of people who are sharing ideas that nobody likes. Like nobody likes Zionism, nobody
Right.
likes fascism. People hate that, like, and especially they're not popular on college campuses. Like
Right.
like let's say that for sure. Um, Maybe they have more quarter with like Fox News or something like that, but not it's never been really, those ideas have been super prominent on college campuses. And it's interesting in some ways because this is one of the areas where I think Zionists are even isolating themselves, because some of the other parts of that coalition, like I think about Tucker Carlson in this moment, who's like, you know, I hate and disagree with on 99% of things,
Yeah.
right? I'm not saying this to like say, hey, great, Tucker's a great guy. But it's really interesting to watch him. Like he platformed Aguilar last week, and I watched that whole interview. It was like an hour and a half,
Yeah.
and it was pretty good. And actually, there's a moment in it where he's like trying to take it a step further to say, like, Trucker is, I think, trying to take it a step further to say the US has to stop funding Israel in any capacity because it is complicit in war crimes. And you're laying all this out. And Aguilar actually like kind of vacillates at that point in the interview to be like, well, I have worked with the IDF other times. I think there's good people there, kind of thing.
There it is.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
you
Right.
know, um, but it was interesting, right, to see that there are people within that, because Tucker is very much like he's the ultimate debate bro, right? He
Yeah.
loves
Yeah.
that, like, we need free speech on campus. I want to become. He just recently was on a college campus giving a huge like anti-immigrant spiel, and then like yelling at students for asking him questions about protections for immigrants and stuff like that, right? So like
A
he
horrible
on the
person.
agenda is there on like so many things,
Yeah.
but I think it's like for some of those folks, they don't like being told that they can't like talk about something,
Yeah.
or that they can't critique something, or,
Right.
say that and so and even in the interview, I'm sorry I'm going off on this tangent,
No,
but in
no.
the interview like he did with Ted Cruz, where they were like kind of debating about this, again, like two of the worst people in the world. But at one point, Cruz like doesn't call him an anti-Semite, but it's sort of implied. And
Yeah.
Tucker like gets so pissed off
Yeah.
in the interview and just becomes like a child from then on out, like
Yeah.
mocking him
Yeah.
basically. And so anyways, I'm just
I
saying
know.
that to say that like I do think that this is another area where Zionism is even becoming isolated within some of the quarter that it is held within, the right that would kind of defend it
Right.
around these sort of issues of like, well, this is their viewpoint. They have a right to share it.
Right.
And, the anti-Zionists are oppressing their free speech or whatever,
Right.
kind of argument
Right.
that they would make.
Yeah,
Um,
it's kind of crazy. I mean, you know, I think, and we've talked about this in our Tinky group therapy, sessions over the last few months, but like the isolation of Zionism, how Zionism, it's kind of like an Ouroboros, right? It kind of eats itself into a deeper and deeper isolation. It feeds off of isolation, and isolation and isolation, being isolated, isolationism. There we go. um, because it's a self-perpetuating like prophecy. It's like they're all against us. In order to sell Zionism to the public, they have to invent this like victimization sort of narrative, right? So everybody hates us, the world is against us. We have to band together, and we have this like super fantastic, strong idea of like this impenetrable state built on this ideology, that's highly militarized, the most weaponized state, outside of the U.S. We're going to have secret nuclear program. Anyone who dares, you know, tap us on the shoulder will get obliterated. It's this kind of thing, and it kind of it also reacts that way in terms of any critique, even from its allies, right? So, you have Tucker Carlson, like, why can't I criticize the Zionist project, or, the state of Israel? Then they'll it works in its own favor again. Everyone's against us, even our allies. That's why we have to be stronger and, be more isolationist. It's kind of this really interesting, and frightening, like, kind of mode of fascism, that's both, very, very different, but also like extremely normal for fascist states and fascist ideologies. But it also points to, this is their end game. Like, they're just going to kind of shrink. It's like, a supernova or whatever. Like, it just kind of like collapses into itself at a certain point. And that's, I think, people have been saying this. Ilan Pappé, the historian, who, has documented the rise of Zionism, is now documenting the collapse of Zionism. This is the beginning of the collapse of Zionism. So it's interesting that that's kind of like working itself out in those very public ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to recommend to folks, if they haven't seen it. You were part of a forum on the East as a podcast, which our friend Sina hosts, as well as he hosts most of the Tanky Group Therapy conversations. But it was called Fascism Has No Ethnicity, a forum on Zio-Fash ascendancy. And is really good and really interesting discussion about, kind of from, for anti-Zionist perspectives. It was cool.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks.
All right. So let's talk a little bit more about your work with EI. So, and kind of one of the things I'm interested in is like how you all kind of do what you do in terms of your methodology, sifting through these different media environments. And part of what I wanted to talk to you is about some of these differences in the media environments, because I find that really fascinating, because I think you and I agree that, like, the United States and Israel are like lockstep in terms of like objectives, at least, right? United States knows that it needs Israel. Israel knows that it needs the United States. Maybe that's the best way to say it.
Yeah.
But there are these real differences too between. So you have, on the one hand, like U.S. mainstream media and the way that it has, and obviously this is going back long time, but I'm thinking about mainly since October 7th, because, I mean, it's a wild thing from the US mainstream media where we all can turn on our computers or our phones and get direct information from people in Palestine, from, there's all kinds. And I get that social media is different for everybody. So not everybody is in the kind of like following a bunch of anti-Zionists or Palestinians, and they may be in their little echo chamber where, it looks totally different than when you and I log on and see, babies and starving people and just like horror,
Yeah.
plus Qassam videos or whatever else we see, right? But within corporate media, there's like such a tight in the United States, such a tight regulation where almost none of that gets through. Like almost none of it registers at all.
Yeah.
They do have stories occasionally, but these are like very filtered, usually like authored or co-authored or heavily featuring like some Israeli state actor or close to state actor, right? Like NGO person or whatever. Um, and you just don't get much that's not from that perspective. If you do, maybe it's like concern from some Western NGO around like starvation that's again like tightly filtered to like not place a lot of blame on who is doing the starving, right? It just naturally is occurring
Yeah.
within this besieged strip of land. Um, but so you have that on one hand, and then you have two kind of layers. I mean, I'm doing broad categories here because I know there's like difference and nuance within these, but two, you have English language Israeli media, which we can all log in and read for ourselves, which goes into way more detail and is also way more honest in the amount of fascism that they're willing to just sort of talk about comfortably, in terms of their own outlook on things. Like, I think if a lot of Americans just read even Israeli English news, they would be like, just like, what the fuck? Like, but then you
It's
have,
pretty out
but
there.
then,
Yeah.
but uh, then you have Israeli Hebrew media too, which is like another layer, which most of us don't read.
Yeah.
But again, like things like Google Translate exist. I know that you have multiple people who also know how to translate, right? And so, um, just talk a little bit about that
Yeah.
and maybe a little bit about how you approach it at EI, but also like some of the differences that you see.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. I mean, there's like a Time magazine cover story this week. Where it's like, a picture of a, a Palestinian mother in Gaza with her starving children, and it's like, Gaza's starvation or whatever. Like, um, and nowhere, nowhere on the cover does it mention who is doing the starving, like you said. Like you can really see that mainstream media, corporate media, um, has has kind of like collectively decided in the last couple of weeks that, ooh, we got to cover what's happening in Gaza because all of these world bodies are saying that people are dying of starvation. But because they're still beholden to their shareholders, and that includes people, who are involved in defense contracts, or the Israeli government themselves. They have to couch it, as they always do, in terms of like, oh, isn't that just awful? Oh God, well, if only the Palestinians had an A, B, and C. And in every single, article, essay, whatever about Gaza, it'll be even in Reuters, maybe I should say, especially in places like Reuters, where, they're covering they have people on the ground in Gaza, stringing for them, feeding them information about what's really going on. And these journalists are Palestinian, obviously, and they're doing incredible work. But even at the bottom of like, you know, of their articles about aid trucks being looted by Israel-backed gangs and whatever, like they'll say, well, since October 7th, when Hamas militants invaded uh, Israel, and launched a deadly attack or whatever. Like that paragraph is, there's always that one sentence or that paragraph that follows every story, and it's not just coincidence. It's because they're trying to kind of complete this circle of a narrative this is Hamas's fault. This is, everything that's happened in Gaza over the last 22 months is a natural and predictable response, very, very normal response from Israel because it was invaded and history started on October 7th. And this is what Palestinians deserve if they wanted to do this. And then they'll always, include a quote from an Israeli source. Most of the time, it's a high-level government official who will not be named. It's someone in the government, someone in the army, who says, oh no, we didn't. We let in 109 trucks yesterday. And there will be no pushback, no actual analysis. This is the story where truth goes to die. If you're the corporate media, where Israel gets a pass for the last 80 years to have every excuse in the book or not even provide one at all, and it still gets the benefit of the doubt in American corporate media. And so at EI, we've been around now for almost 25 years, which is incredible. And it's because of the quality of the work that we do. Ali and the other co-founders, started the Electronic Intifada because there was a need that needed to be filled in terms of the void, the vacuum of truth about what was happening in Palestine, and not just like what was happening in the moment, but always weaving historical context through every news item, analysis piece, first person narrative, interview, to try and like restore the foundation of the reality for Palestinians, which is a history, a century of dispossession, ethnic cleansing, genocide, colonialism, settlement, and expulsion, and these crimes of humanity and war crimes, and along with that, the propping up the international legal foundations for Palestinians' legitimate right to resist these things. Whatever value international law has these days anymore, but it's important. It's important to be the counterweight to the just like deluge of racist and colonialist, news items on Palestine. And so in the last, almost 2 years, I can't believe it's been almost 2 fucking years, we have, kind of doubled, tripled our efforts in platforming Palestinians in Gaza who are writing about what they see, what they experience, what they taste, what they smell, what they hear, in their full dignity, without any caveats. We are able to, we try to get people on the ground in Gaza as often as we can on our weekly live streams. And, I think we're all just compelled by this very core principle belief that Palestinians have the right to exist, and seeing, just the gargantuan vacuum that corporate media has produced in the last 25 years that EI has been around, where it is requiring the audience to dehumanize Palestinians, to make their genocide and ethnic cleansing palatable, to manufacture consent for what we're seeing on the ground in Gaza. And so, as I don't know, we have our features editors who are working literally day and night to edit these pieces that are coming out of Gaza. Um, our own staff editors, we all write our own kind of analyses in little kind of news posts. I, my task is to gather news from on the ground, within like a 6-7 day period since the previous live stream, and compile them into a report that I deliver on Thursdays. And I have a system that I feel like I'm always kind of tweaking and perfecting. I rely heavily on first, primary sources, which is the Ministry of Health in Gaza, the Government Media Office, the Civil Defense Corps, the Ministry of the Interior, the Education Ministry, and then, officers in the UN programs. So, like the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and UNRWA, the Agency for Palestine Refugees, people who are on the ground in medical capacities, doctors, nurses, physicians, midwives, people who are uh, feeding and serving people. Those are the primary sources that I work with, that we all work with. And it's I every once in a while I do have to go through like a Reuters report or a Guardian article. Sometimes I have to see how something, some incident, some horrific incident um, is being talked about in order to figure out what really happened. And I have to go through these, like, yeah, these news reports on these corporate channels, and it's like night and day. I don't know. It's I'm rarely pulled into, corporate media uh context. I don't seek it out. It doesn't even occur to me to like ever turn on CNN or like Fox News, um but it's always so jarring when I see it, because it's so obvious how they are trying to feed a narrative into the language that they use to talk about, a child starving to death. And places like the New York Times, I think, are it's an object lesson in that kind of manufacturing of a certain narrative, using the language of, posh intellectual liberalism. Um, you know, New York Times is like the peak for Western journalism. It's somewhat untouchable. If the New York Times says it, then it is, from God's mouth to your ears, sort of thing. Um, and the way that they have not only manufactured consent for the genocide itself, but laundered the just atrocious, dehumanizing lies of the Israeli military, um, and of people being genocided, is just, it's astonishing. It will never not shock me. I'm like, I have a special place, in my bitter heart, of hatred toward the New York Times because of its absolute nefarious, systematic dehumanization of Palestinians.
It's truly awful. And I appreciate you talking about, your methodology and all of the primary source work you do with folks in Gaza. And that's like, I mean, I think that's one of there's so many reasons I'm sure why people tune in to what you do on Thursday, but that's certainly one of them, is to hear those different, very, harrowing, heartbreaking stories. But also stories of people that are like, we're still here. We're still, struggling. Like, don't give up, and telling people that, all of us that are not there need to be doing more ourselves too. um but I think one of the fascinating things, to go back to the Times for a minute, is like, so it's there's a I mean, some of this is just corporate journalism in
Hmm.
America, which is like basically just public relations. Like it's just
Yeah.
somebody sends you a pitch, and I hilariously I get them on millennials. Like we get people who like want to have some CEO come on. I think that they think we hate millennials and like capitalism. So they're like, like, oh, let me send you this like
What a good fit.
libertarian to talk to, you know. But anyways, I mean, they come pre-packaged with
Yeah.
like, this is the story, right? And ask this person this, and this,
Yeah.
and that is a lot, unfortunately, at like all levels, from local news to which really doesn't exist that much
No.
anymore. It's mostly just like these national firms that have bought up the remaining properties of local newspapers and so on. But it is mostly PR and like and then state propaganda, which is another form of PR. And like folks like Alex, K, I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name, but he did a book about propaganda, which is something people have been talking about a long time, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of thing in that realm where it's like a police shoot somebody and like what does the reporter do? Well, they ask for a statement from the police department on what happened and then they do nothing else. Like they
Yeah.
don't try to interview people at the scene
Yeah.
or talk to the family
No.
or like, it's just like, okay, what does the police's PR department say happened, and of course, we see this too. Like, this is so much of the war reporting. Whenever we have a big war in the United States, is just like this of like, what does Matt Miller say at the podium? For the State Department or whatever. But the fascinating part, and it's even like I think this comes out a lot in maybe some of Asa and Ali's work because they're also breaking down like some of these propaganda and like atrocity propaganda stuff that comes out, is that these reports that you get in the Times will not even acknowledge things that are being said in the Israeli media. Like it would
Right.
take somebody 30 minutes to spend a little bit of time to figure out like, oh, we have all these people talking about the Hannibal Directive, or we
Yeah.
have all these people that are like questioning the or all these like countervailing narratives about the mass rape, claims even from Israelis, right? And so on and so forth. And so it's fascinating to me also at that level of just they really rely on us to be quite stupid and not to be willing to like spend any
Right.
time at all looking at multiple sources. It actually makes me think a little bit like Cedric Robinson and Elizabeth Robinson used to run this local news show that they did that was, I can't remember the name, but it was like a world news show. And what they did is they just bought like newspapers from all over the world. And then they would just eventually they developed like correspondents and people within different parts of the world. But they just read newspapers from other places in the world to get to like
Hmm.
find world news. Because to get world news, it's not like you could watch Dan Rather and know what the world news is, right? You'd actually have to see what people are talking about in other
Yeah.
contexts. But it's so interesting to me to have this pro-Zionist propaganda in the United States that is more tightly censored and regulated than pro-Zionist propaganda in the Zionist entity that is under military censorship. Like it's
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's wild. I mean, yeah, you're right. Like, you look at a an article, kind of going back to what you were saying earlier about looking at an article in like Times of Israel or the Jerusalem Post, and like, you know, every Palestinian is not even Palestinian, but an Arab, and not only an Arab, but a terrorist, right? Like that's kind of like their style guide is like every Palestinian is an Arab or an Arab terrorist or just terrorist. That's just kind of across the board. There's never any there's never any contact. There's never any, like they exist, Jerusalem Post and Times of Israel exist to prop up the narrative of the state, which is, an isolationist, Zionist, very violent, pro-war, pro-genocide, settler colony, entity. Fine, but in some of the reporting in those newspapers or in places like Haaretz, which is kind of like the New York Times of Tel Aviv, you'll find these investigations which debunk a lot of the state's narratives about, like, as you said, Israel's use of the Hannibal Directive on October 7th, where, they shot up and firebombed, hundreds of cars at the festival, the Lollapalooza outside Auschwitz. And, anyone looking at those photos can see that there's no way that, a couple hundred Palestinian fighters from Gaza armed with like rifles and a couple of RPGs could have destroyed hundreds of cars, right? Like anybody, even the New York Times could probably tell, but they'll never even talk about it in American corporate media, because it destroys the narrative that they were so eager to help build for Israel in those first few weeks, of the genocide. And with the mass rapes hoax story, I mean, the New York Times, screams before silence or whatever it was, screams without words. They like, using screams a lot. This like absolutely like terrific piece of propaganda that they served to the Israeli narrative on a silver platter was debunked by the Electronic Intifada and by Mondo Weiss and by journalists all over who actually had receipts and were talking to the family members that were mentioned in the article. The entire premise of the article and all of the so-called survivors or witnesses, it was all debunked. The whole thing came apart. It was like a plate of noodles, at the end. And the Times has, till now, this was over a year ago that time is conceptual. I can't even remember when it was actually published, but they have never issued a retraction. I mean, Jeffrey Gettleman, the lead journalist for this hoax article, was, it was completely debunked. He should have said, oh God, maybe I should go back and talk to the people that I spoke with and ask them corroborating questions and ask for evidence. He never did any of that. This is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, of course, and he went on to, continue to sell his grift everywhere. And, I don't know. I mean, it used to be that like the New York Times used to love a scoop. I mean, here's the scoop. Right? The scoop is sitting right there in your own editorial office that, this story never happened. These witnesses don't exist. These stories are completely made up. And I mean, this is, in any other context, the New York Times would do its basic due diligence as the New York Times, to figure out what actually happened and what didn't. But I think it got a lot of clicks. It got a lot of praise. It got a lot of awards. That kind of journalism, that sensationalist, made up journalism, earned them a lot of money. And there's no way that they could, bear to retract any of it. So they just keep perpetuating it. They keep doubling down on it. It is just absolutely insane to watch how the New York Times continues to peddle, these lies, and people, keep subscribing and keep reading, and it's so, I don't know, it's pathetic and it's sad, and it says a lot about where our journalism is right now.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. And I think unfortunately it says a lot too. I wish that it didn't, but like I mean, media literacy is like a not a great, it's kind of a sort of liberal limited frame even itself.
Yeah.
But, there's just the I just wish that like so many people had more of a desire to even seek the truth.
Yeah.
And I think it's also this especially around things that are like so obvious. I mean, this is the thing, it's all falling apart. Like they can't. I think the reason that they go back to that story is because it's the only thing that they have found that that they're able to affect a portion of the population on an emotional level,
Yeah.
right? Like I've talked to people about this who are like ministers who are anti-Zionist and are trying to like work with their congregations, and they're like, once that gets brought up, then they really struggle to, because they'll be like, "Oh no, look at Electronic Intifada,
Right.
look at this other stuff, like it's been debunked, it's not real." And the people look at them like, "You're
Yeah.
one of those crazy people,
Yeah.
right? Like you're a conspiracy theorist."
Right.
And it's funny too because I remember when it first came up, and I thought nobody's gonna believe this. Like
Yeah.
I just
Me
didn't.
too.
I actually
Yeah.
like when the very first time that I think Ali and Asa were like entering into kind of like debunking it, I was still sort of in the mindset of like, why does this matter so much? Like,
Yeah.
why do people care? Like, I mean, it just seemed, obviously I
Yeah.
would care if people were mass raped, right? But
Of
like
course.
it was an outlandish idea. It
Yeah.
didn't seem the least bit
Right.
believable or plausible.
Right.
And there just wasn't enough to like from the beginning, it just was nonsensical to me.
Complete. I mean, the
Um,
stories that they came up with were like, a woman having her breast chopped off, and then Hamas fighters were playing football with it. I'm like,
yeah,
like I mean, that's like a gruesome story that like a 6-year-old would come up with. Like, there's no, like, if people just stopped for a second and listened to the amount of just absurd stories that were invented around
yeah,
then. Yeah, I was like you. I was like, there's no way that people are going to believe. Like, that's insane. Come on. Like, come on. But they believed it because that level of dehumanization of, especially of Palestinian men, Muslim
hmm
men in general, but Palestinian men in particular, had already been like the groundwork for that had been laid over the last 20 years,
yeah,
where Arab men are savage, and they're like sexual deviants, and they hate women, they don't respect women. It's the same. They want to rape Israeli women because they're Jews and they hate Jews, but they also are sexually repressed, and so they, like all of these like insanely racist, disgusting Orientalist tropes about Arab men and Palestinian men in particular, were all kind of bubbling up. And so I think people like turned off the skeptical and cynical and critical thought part of their brain, and let the like the propaganda consumption brain kind of take over, because they had been primed to see Muslim men as subhuman, as these savages, as barbarians. I mean, this is, and we've talked about this too on tangy therapy. Of, like, this is what white Europeans always have perpetuated, this idea that men of the global south, in countries that they were colonizing, were barbarians, were savages, wanted to, take and rape their, pure white women. And, this was the same logic that, white Klansmen were trying to perpetuate against black men in this country. It's just like we see this pattern, and, people who read the New York Times and, have like a Black Lives Matter flag in their front lawn, and, they drive a Tesla with like, I got one before Elon was crazy, all these bumper stickers. They think of themselves as like smart, skeptical, critical people. But when it came to these these lies that were being fed in the media about Palestinian men, they grabbed onto it, and they haven't allowed themselves to be deprogrammed. So it's remarkable to see on like a sociological level, about how propaganda can be fed by sustained kind of, low level or high level racism through the media as an apparatus to dehumanize a certain population. It's fascinating and it's terrifying.
It is. It is. And it's, somebody raised in the chat, like the Ukraine flags and the
Yes.
Biden stickers in the Berkeley
Oh,
Hills, and it's like, I mean,
yep.
and I'm in an area too where there's like a lot of this, and where there was like this
Yeah.
huge outpouring of, I don't want to use the word solidarity because I don't even think it is. It was just like
It was
this, like, yeah, my kid's
performative
school
solidarity.
districts,
Yeah.
like doing like, canned
Yeah.
soup
Right.
fundraisers and stuff like this for Ukraine, like
Right.
immediately, Ukrainian
Right.
flags everywhere.
God,
And like a lot of
there's
it,
still Ukrainian flags everywhere in my
there
neighborhood.
are.
They're
Yeah.
everywhere. These people
Yeah.
are like, I'm like, and anyway, yeah,
But
that's a
it's
whole other.
connected, I think, to this dehumanization too, because
Yeah.
there was also so much propaganda too about Russia evil, Russia
Yes.
monster, Putin
Yeah.
bad, and
Yeah.
I'm not sitting here saying like, oh, whatever. Like, I'm not trying to excuse certain policies or people,
Yeah.
but the point being that like they were just so primed to jump
So
right
primed.
on this
Yeah.
bandwagon. And then when the actual like thing that, it's like, oh my gosh, there's a genocide unfolding in Gaza, like,
Yeah.
will any of you people do any of the same things? And it's
Yeah.
like, I had so many conversations where people just like stop talking to me or like walk away,
Yeah.
because it's just like their brains like can't,
Yeah.
like you said, it's like the same thing. It's like this dehumanization, and they're just not seeing people anyway.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah. It makes me
let's
insane.
Yeah, no, it's totally nuts. Let's talk about, so you wrote this recent piece, um and you cover, I mean, one of your beats really seems to be kind of covering obviously students, but also children and children in Gaza. You've been covering that quite a bit, in the genocide, through the genocide. And I certainly don't, I mean, I appreciate your role there immensely. I don't necessarily envy it because I know how difficult that has to be, but I'm glad that you're doing it. Um, but like so as part of your media roundup for last week's live stream, you published a piece, and you talked in it about this abduction of these 10 children from one of the, so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation kill zones. I'll just call
Yeah.
them that because that's
Yeah.
what they are,
Yeah.
that are supposed to be distribution centers.
Right.
So talk a little bit about this story. I'm sure many folks have seen the video with the kids, like, tearfully talking about what's been done to them, but I don't want to assume everybody has.
Yeah.
But maybe you could just talk a little bit about that, and kind of also just some of the stuff you feel being normalized, and, the importance of continuing to kind of report on these things that are happening with children in Gaza.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, even when I was at KPFA in the early 2000s, because of my status as a mother and someone who, loves children, and knows intimately just the horror of, thinking about your child being harmed in any way or anything. Like I kind of gravitated uh, toward those stories. I mean, I remember being reporting in the West Bank in 2005, 2006, and I interviewed a mother and her child, and the child had gone selectively mute, like he wouldn't talk anymore because he had been so traumatized, because his just like a week before Israeli soldiers invaded his house, and they held the parents at gunpoint while one soldier brutally beat this child underneath a stairwell. And the parents couldn't do anything, and the child couldn't fight back. He was a child. He was, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10 years old. And I remember, talking with the mom, and both of us were just, in tears. And there's no way. There's no way that I could have understood that kind of pain. But I have been, throughout my journalism career, like, just very drawn to trying to amplify these stories, because, you think as a journalist, like, if I have, these skills, I want to do something that will change something. Like, this child should be a child. He should be free. He shouldn't be terrorized, to fall asleep every night because last week the soldiers broke in and beat him almost to death. Like, there's some sort. I think I started out as, like, I don't know, with some sort of, like, altruism, in terms of, like, what I can do as a journalist, and that has slowly faded over time, or maybe, like, morphed into a different sort of, like, we're all doing what we can. I have these certain skills, and now what we're doing is documenting. We're documenting history. We are naming the perpetrators who are doing this. We are documenting what they are doing, so that the world can't say that they didn't know, and children can have documentation, in order to go and find their perpetrators of this violence. Like, that's, I think, what for a lot of us in, sort of like movement journalism, are doing. Anyway, that's all to say that the torture of Palestinian children has been a core tenet of policy by the Israeli military, since the inception of Israel. The just absolute, unrestrained, brutal violence that Israel metes out, against families and children in particular, is not just, because children are easy targets, and Israelis are terrible soldiers, but because it is meant to break the back of a society. It's meant to break the spirit. It's meant to terrorize. When you hurt a child, the entire family feels it, and those traumas reverberate generationally. So now you have 4 or 5 generations of traumatized, tortured people. And so, here, we have seen, there's 17,000 children, I think right now, who have lost one or more limbs in Gaza since October 2023, right? That's a trauma. Those children are all traumatized. Every single child in Gaza is traumatized. There are tens of thousands of children who have seen their parents, their loved ones, their brothers, their sisters murdered in front of their eyes in brutal ways, who have, we all have seen the videos of children, picking through rubble to find the body parts of their baby sister or their mother or their father, right? Like, and carrying them in plastic bags. Like, these, what our comrade Lara Shihai talks about as psychic intrusions, where we can't unsee that, and we will always see that. And that is an affirmation of our own humanity, that we haven't gone numb to it. And that it's a commitment to keep fighting to make sure that this doesn't happen to anybody. And so, and children throughout Israel's colonial project have been tortured in prisons. They've been kidnapped. They've been sexually assaulted. They have been beaten. They have been severely injured and put into solitary, confinement. And this happens every day. So at the end of June, I believe, children who are trying to help uh, find sustenance for their starving family members have been going to these GHF killing field sites. And for whatever reason, 10 uh, boys were snatched by Israeli soldiers at one of these sites in southern Gaza and detained in the hot sun, beaten, stripped naked, put into metal cages, like 1 by 1 meter square cages, and then taken to places like Side Teiman, which is a torture camp, a concentration camp. And there they were interrogated for weeks, every day for weeks, questioned, intimidated, threatened. Some of the soldiers would show these children pictures of their family members and say, if you don't tell us where the tunnels are, we're going to kill your family. These are children. I mean, sometimes when I take a breath, I get a little
No, I understand.
sorry, but
No, you're fine.
anyway, so I'll just keep talking really fast. So these children were tortured. They were put into places that one of the children said was kind of like an incubator. You know how you have like these like chicken farms, and they're like these big kind of concrete structures, no windows, just walls and a roof, and then there's like huge like heat lamps everywhere. So a child said that he and some of the others were put into these concrete rooms with heat lamps and kind of tortured because it's the middle of summer. They're in the desert, and there's heat lamps. They were given rotten food. They were taken to a place that they called the disco room, which is another form of torture where the Israelis would play this like loud Hebrew pop music, which would nauseate anybody. But under these circumstances, like, is a form of torture. They would just play these songs over and over again at like ear-splitting volume. And when the children, when they were done with the children, they dropped them back off at one of the crossings, and they were, taken back by the hospital administration and checked out and treated. However, the hospitals can treat them because there's no medicine, and there's no saline in some of the hospitals. There's no electricity. And then their families came. But like during this month, I was seeing news reports of some of these family members, these mothers who are like, my son, he's 12 years old, and he volunteered to go get us a bag of flour, and he never came back. And then, it turned out that there were 10 families who had their sons disappear. And I was like, that's insane. That's what Israel does. But like, I didn't know that these kids were ever going to be returned, and then they were returned. And in any other context, you think about like if if Russian soldiers had abducted 10 Ukrainian children and tortured them in those ways for a month, the entire world would be up in arms. There's no way that could happen and not have Russia be punished. Or if it was, I'm like, but because it's Palestinian children, it's normalized. Israel has a reason. They can get away with it. Israel, must have done it for some reason. And it was not picked up. I'm still waiting. We're still waiting for, the story of Hind Rajab to be picked up by any, mainstream media source. There are tens of thousands of children who have been killed by this monster. And they don't They don't get front page headlines, except for every once in a while when, like, this week the Washington Post decides to run the names of all the children. Who killed them? Which weapons killed them? Who made the weapons? Washington Post is owned by Bezos. Like, I feel like I'm always going crazy. And the stories like what happened to these children, it's one story. There are plenty of children who have been disappeared, who are still missing from these GHF sites. People who are finding the desiccated corpses of children at these crossings, at these so-called aid sites, who have no identification. And it's this. So that was just one of many stories that I wanted to amplify. The Palestinian Center for Human Rights does incredible work. I mean, that's the human rights organization that documented these stories from these children, these stories of torture and detention and abuse and beatings, and because it's a part of the wider scope of documenting these crimes, so that we can have retribution, so that we can have prosecution of the perpetrators of them.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly important, and I want to get back to retribution with you in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it's like it recalls to me, I mean, what you describe, right? It sounds like when you get the full revelations of like Abu Ghraib, or you get like these, Guantanamo Bay like kind of stories. And I mean, even with Abu Ghraib, it was hideous, and the United States did it. But there was at least some coverage of it, because it was revealed to the world, and they're like, we have to at least talk about this and play some kind of, accountability charade and whatever.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me the amount of stuff that U.S. corporate media is just working overtime to filter out in terms of stories like this. I mean, we're talking about Abu Ghraib for like 12-year-olds or something like that, and I mean, the prison you're talking about, I mispronounce it all the time, but Timan, something like that.
Sede Taman, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the same one that had the rape scandal, where you get the government
literal video.
having video of it, and then there's public discussion within like the Knesset or whatever other weird government councils and stuff that Israel had, where they're and then these people are on the Israeli media, and there's like a whole movement to say that this is allowed, and
the right to rape protests.
Yeah, absolutely insane stuff, where again, like if you talk about this with some person who doesn't pay any attention to this stuff, they'd be like, oh, you're making that up. Like it can't possibly be real what you're talking about right now. And it's like, no, like he admits it.
Like the meme. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They not only admit it, but they're proud of it. The Israeli prison guard who led the gang rape of this one Palestinian man in Sede Taman, he was interviewed on Israeli media, and at first he had like a face mask because he didn't want to be identified. But then after he kind of tested the waters, because he didn't really get much pushback, he literally took his mask off, and then he was on like national television programs for weeks. He was like a national celebrity. People were so proud of the work that he did, to sexually assault a man. I mean, it was just like, and then you had protests, because the Knesset was weighing, should rape be, allowed in prisons, because they're
and some
Palestinians,
judge at some point, I think, was like thinking about putting them on administrative leave or something like that.
And they house arrest or something, right?
Yeah.
And people
And then they were like,
were
oh, we need
yeah,
to like break them out of the
yeah,
barracks they're being held in and stuff
right.
like that.
And it is like, this is societal rot, like this is not an aberration. This isn't just some of the Israeli public. This is an overwhelming majority. Um, and this is what we're trying to fight. I mean, we can't let them can't we can't let them win, and we're not. But the people at the forefront of that retribution is the resistance. And that's
Yeah,
another part of the story that is being conveniently, left out, is the audacity of the Palestinian resistance forces, um, that are continuing to exact a heavy military cost on Israel for its genocide.
absolutely. I mean, I was joking with you before we started that so we're doing Red Dawn tomorrow on our Imperial 80s series. And like, so I've been rewatching it and just a horrible, unhinged movie. But like, one of the things that is fascinating within it, and I've talked to Sina about this at a certain point too, is that as Americans, in some ways, like we're indoctrinated in a lot of really weird ways, right? But
Hmm.
we're indoctrinated to like see ourselves as the underdogs, right?
Yeah,
And to think, because this is
yeah,
part of sort of the the national origin story of this
yeah.
idea of the American Revolution as like resistance to tyranny or whatever,
Right,
right? Which of
right.
course is like
No, it's
a
just they didn't
whole
want to pay their
propaganda
taxes. Yeah,
operation in itself, right? It's
right.
massive. But the but like you watch this movie and the heroes of this are a high school football team and members of the student body, like council and president, that become guerrilla fighters
That's
taking
right.
on the USSR, Cuba, Mexico, Nicaragua, El Salvador, as they've all
My God.
collectively invaded. And the thing about it though is like part of why it is effective, right, is because you're identifying with these high school students who are attacking soldiers in tanks, who are throwing IEDs, who are like taking what they can from these oppressive troops that are in their land, this occupying army, and they're going on the offensive and they're
Yeah,
beating them at their own game. And you think, well, this is why they can't show the Qassam brigades
yeah.
on mainstream media, right? Because people would immediately see
Oh
those
yeah,
images of
yeah.
the guy in like sweats and flip-flops or whatever, going and or track pants and going and dropping an IED in a tank and
Yeah,
say like that's the hero. Those
right,
are the people that we should be getting behind.
right, right,
And so they can't have that imagery
right.
be, that's why it's so heavily suppressed.
Yeah.
um
I mean, I
you
also
know
think about, like, during the first and second Intifada. I mean, there's been 40 years of corporate media, um, you know, uh, opportunities to show. I mean, and they used to. I think back in the first Intifada, like, CNN would actually show children throwing stones at tanks. I think there was more of like at least some sort of like attention, however meager it was, to Palestinians fighting occupation. By the second Intifada, a lot less for sure.
yeah,
Um, Mostly because it was more overtly an armed resistance. Um, and yeah, I mean, kind of like the the marching orders, if you will, of the corporate media has been to portray Palestinians either as savages or as victims, never as valiant, heroic, leaders of a legitimate resistance force. And so it was kind of like, in the second Intifada, I think it was also, the time of like the occupation and invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. And so the media was very much swinging heavily toward, manufacturing consent for those invasions and occupations, and less so on what was happening in Palestine, especially, if they were going to show what Palestinians were really up against. And by that time, of course, also Israel and the U.S. were completely merged as one. And so, I mean, like there have been opportunities, but
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, it's
That period was really essential, I think, you're absolutely right. There was a shift that happened in mainstream corporate media with, post 9/11, with,
yeah,
Afghanistan and the Iraq War. And, obviously the language, the all-encompassing language of the war on terrorism was able to
yeah,
scoop up so many different types of movements into one kind of bucket, right?
yeah.
And unfortunately, that's like a huge ideological soup that we have to like wade through or whatever. I don't know, I'm mixing metaphors, but
Totally.
um yeah, it's true that like even in the, I think, very early days of the Iraq War, there was like some allowance for anti-war voices within
Hmm.
some of these media outlets, like put somebody on for a few minutes and kind of like
Right.
it was never wasn't like an equal thing of like, hey,
No.
here's, you know, whatever, 30 minutes of Cornell West and 30
Right.
minutes of Tucker Carlson or something,
Right.
like, I don't know. But like it wasn't like that, but it was like a little bit of okay, we'll have a panel with four guys and one of them will get 5 minutes to, or
Yeah.
not even like 2 minutes to talk
Yeah.
about something, right? Um, and they figured out somewhere in that war that they weren't gonna do that, and
Yeah.
they haven't gone back. Like since then, there's just no allowance for like critical
Yeah.
dissenting voices around US imperialism within the media at all. And it was always, just to be clear, it was always marginalized. It was
Yeah.
like always an approach that was designed to get people to a pro empire kind of output.
Yep.
But there was like this phase where they're like, well, we need to have some dissent in it in order to seem real to people, in
Yeah.
order to seem like a conversation or a debate or something. And they just let go of that. They were like,
Oh,
no,
completely.
we can have the CIA guy, the like,
Right.
Heritage Foundation
Uh-huh.
person, the
And a
FBI
general.
person,
Yeah. Yeah.
and like, yeah, a
Mm-hmm.
general, and like some horrible congressperson, and let's just put them all up here, you
Right.
know.
Right. The
And
whole
that's what like
spectrum. Right.
that's what Sunday news is like every day
Yes.
now,
Oh,
every time now, like those weekly shows. It's like, here are all of your shades of Fed. Um, all right.
that's good.
Um, so I do want to talk about this other. So there was this New York Times thing. Like they again they set the bar for the depravity and the capitulation,
Yeah.
to Zionism and imperialism. But they ran this piece, I guess, about a week ago, about a child in Gaza who had died of starvation, right? Which is happening every freaking day. It's
Yeah.
not just one. It's like,
It's up
multiple
to like almost
Palestinians.
100 children now in the
Yeah,
last few weeks.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's just
And
recorded deaths. Those are the
right,
bodies that are brought to the hospital.
right, right.
Yeah.
Um, and never mind how like difficult that is at this point, and how
Yeah.
limited the capacity of those
Yeah.
things are.
Yeah.
Um, but they issued this correction around this child that was saying that the child had a pre-existing medical condition. And so
Hmm.
basically it was trying to insinuate that he that the child didn't die of starvation, that it was a medical condition that they had that caused them to die, basically, or escalate. I didn't
Yeah.
pay enough attention to like figure out what their rationale was here.
Yeah.
But I thought it was such an interesting thing, because it was like, to me, it's such an American framing too,
Yes.
of like, nowhere in the world, I'm not aware, at least, of anywhere else in the world where the term like pre-existing medical condition has
That's right.
any kind of meaning,
Right.
right? Because in America, you're like, oh, well, that means your health insurance might not cover
Right.
it. Like that's where that term comes from. It's
Right.
a private insurance terminology that
And
Obamacare was supposed to fix, right?
right. Yeah, exactly. Like there's that and the insinuation that disabled children
Right.
are it's okay to starve them.
Right.
And then people in Gaza talked with the parents after that, like just disgusting, so-called correction came out, and the parents said, no, the baby was perfectly fine and healthy. And then, got I can't even remember what it was. It's something because of the
Yeah.
occupation, the siege,
That's the thing
like
too, is it's
so
like, where
right.
do the pre-existing health conditions
Yes.
come from in Gaza,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
it's not like Gaza is some like
No.
nice,
No,
plush
it was
suburb
17
where
years of
like
siege before the genocide. 17 years of people saying that they didn't have chemotherapy medications and dialysis machines. Like there is still there were medications on the list that were banned from Gaza. That's part of Israel's siege. That is part of genocidal system, and then you starve them. So people who weren't able to get, chemotherapy medication and then got starved, you can't say that it was just because of cancer. I mean, I don't, and the New York Times, I mean, they got a lot of backlash from, people who can see through the lines there, obviously, but I haven't seen any sort of correction to the correction or any sort of mea culpa. Of course, they're, as I said, like they still haven't retracted the completely and thoroughly debunked stories about mass rapes on October 7th. Why would they debunk or, issue a correction to their correction on this one? It's just like insidious. Yeah, like sick children they don't get sick in Gaza just because, of some natural phenomenon. They're predisposed to it.
yeah.
It's generations of siege and trauma, and the poisoning of the water. I mean, before the genocide, the water in Gaza was something like 96% non-potable because Israel had destroyed the underground water aquifers during the, decades of settlement inside Gaza. It's like, again, like there's no other people on earth who have been so thoroughly dehumanized and battered and tortured and then mocked by places like the New York Times. I mean, how disgusting.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's totally revolting. We'll get to them in a minute and what we're gonna do with them. But so I like it is a very interesting moment right now, like in terms of watching, as I think you said it on Tanky Therapy, like the memo went out, and so you're watching. I mean, I think even Richie Torres, who's like Come
Ugh,
After Us and Lara Shihai, like
yeah,
horrible, horrible human
yes,
being, like such a strong Zionist. But I think he even said something about like let the food in, right? Let the aid in, right? Something like that. So just watching like all of these people who have been like cheerleading this genocide
yeah,
for almost 2 years now, who are now either coming out, some cases even calling it a genocide. In some cases, it's much more limited. It's like, it and this is the interesting thing is like there's some people who are just not comfortable with starvation, which is an interesting.
yeah,
I don't quite know what to make. I mean, I'm certainly not comfortable with starvation, but I don't understand quite like what that trigger is in people's brain that differentiates like, oh, bombing every
right,
building in this entire place and doing this and this,
right,
and like, bombing all the hospitals, bombing all the
right,
schools, taking out all the like all of this was okay.
right,
Killing X tens of thousands of people, probably, hundreds. We
yeah,
don't know how many.
yeah,
Um, that was all okay, but like now that there's starvation happening, I mean, yes, I'm with you. We need to do something about it. So like there,
Yeah.
yes, but I'm so skeptical and like as I think everybody should be
Yeah.
about all of these people who are jumping on this bandwagon now. And I think it like for me, I'm sort of trying to sort out like where there's something there's a logic going on here. um it's either this is sort of where I'm at, like either this is just another psyop, which I'm like, or propaganda, like they're trying to shift the narrative in certain ways because they're like, okay, we need to get the aid in, but we're going to continue with the ethnic
Right.
cleansing because
Right.
this is like we need to make this look a little bit better. um or, like, and so that's like a way of genocide through other means, looking for a narrative that kind of enables that because they feel like the pressure is on them right now around this. There's another part of me that's like some of these people may be starting to worry, I hope, that they'll be held accountable for
Yeah.
this stuff. Um and so they're like, well, we need to make a shift now because this thing is going down. And at least if we start to say we're not with this and we're against this, then when the trials come, we can have some kind of plausible deniability or whatever. I mean, that also
Yeah.
relies on me having a little bit more faith. I mean, I do believe in the accountability thing, and we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But I'm also like, do they really think like, I don't know. It's like you thought you could get away with all this shit, and
Right.
then
Right.
now like what is going on? So yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of both. I think it's definitely like reputation management at this point, where yeah, maybe some of the smarter ones, like the more liberal fence writers, who love Israel, love everything Israel does and is about, are kind of seeing the writing on the wall, and the optics are like, ugh. I mean, it's one thing, um, to have to see photos of babies with their heads blown off. Like, well, obviously, like, that's Israeli policy. They're gonna bomb who they're gonna bomb. But I think it's another to see like a slow starvation of children. I mean, this is so gruesome and grim. And you're so right that like I don't understand why 2 years of seeing children's bodies being blown to bits didn't move anybody with any modicum of power. But this is, I'm still trying to figure out what the difference is. Um, I think, I think there's something in the language. Bombing is, it's that's just people can write it off as like, well, this is just the spoils of war, these are collateral damage,
Right, there's like
or
this
there's
calculation of
exactly
like,
right.
and so it's like
Right.
even if you miscalculate, you tried to
Right.
calculate, and you
Right.
can have some kind of plausible deniability
That's
about it.
exactly it. Right. Yeah, there's that. And then, but starvation, I mean, they're using, and it's a term, it's an actual like term. Famine is the term, the IPC classification, which, IPC is like an international body that monitors starvation levels. And, right now, Gaza, is in phase 5. So it's famine phase 5, and that's like irreversible, catastrophic famine. But I think there's a way in which the language around famine or even starvation or hunger is like more. It's like a passive. It's something that happens. It's something that just happens naturally. In the minds of the colonizers and the imperial core, right? Like famine is, it's so, God, that's just so horrible. It's more like a natural disaster than anything that's structurally engineered that I might be culpable for. So there, it's so, I am like, just like even trying to think about the calculations that are being made by these people, where like, oh, I can speak out against, famine, but I can't really speak out against, children's bodies being shredded by bombs. I think there's like it's safer for some like complete asshole like Richie Torres, to come out and say, let aid into Gaza now, because it's a little bit of plausible deniability, it's better optics, and it also kind of then they can like people like Richie Torres can say, uh, you know, we have to pour more money into the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. We have to fund the State Department request for, was it $50 billion for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. That's a way we can get it in. Or we can do aid drops. How about we do airdropped parcels of aid that yesterday killed a nurse in his displacement tent, right? These are dangerous. These are just they're oh, hey, any opportunity the US has to waste money, kill people, and not solve a problem that it created, they'll take, right? So the airdropped aid is, exponentially more expensive. It's completely unsustainable. The aid inside these airdropped parcels is rotten, right? It's just like humiliation on top of humiliation on top of danger on top of death. And but Richie Torres can say, well, I support the aid drops, therefore I am against famine. He can't say, I support Yemen's humanitarian intervention against the bombing of children in Gaza, right? So like so I think it's safer for these absolute monsters to say something like, we support the aid, but not be specific about opening the land crossings, about stopping Israel from besieging Gaza, and about holding those people accountable. I mean, that's, if people wanted to really end the starvation in Gaza, or the famine, or whatever they want to call it, they would move heaven and earth and a huge military fleet to, to Tel Aviv, to materially force Israel to stop the siege on Gaza. That's the only way, So anyway, I think it's just optics. I think it's opportunism.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And the famine point that you raise is an important one. I mean, my mother's family's Irish, and like talking with Irish scholars and stuff like that, and it's like
Yeah.
they're like, look, it wasn't like we didn't have food.
Right.
We were exporting food to England
Yeah.
as we were starving to death,
Yeah.
right? And um,
Yeah. And then
like,
England exported that policy to India and
yeah,
starved tens of millions
yeah,
of people to death. I mean, that's this
yeah,
this is the hallmark of the colonizer,
yeah,
to create a crisis, in order to subjugate and kill off the indigenous people, and then present it as like a natural disaster. Yeah, the Irish potato famine, right? It sounds like
right.
in order to try and portray the Irish as like bumbling, country hicks who didn't know how to feed themselves, and then there was like a disease in the potatoes and they all starved to death. Like, so dumb. Right? Like that's how it was
Yeah, no, it is.
manufactured.
It is totally. And
It's
there was,
just, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, but no,
Sorry.
it's an important. No, that's good. I mean, it's an important point because it is true that, I mean, I completely agree. As we see, like, we need to be super critical of people.
Yeah.
It's also like, I mean, I thought Ali did a great job of breaking down the state recognition thing last week,
Yeah.
which is another one of these schemes right now. And I mean, on
Yeah.
some level, these things are interesting, right? But at the same time, it's like, as he breaks down, like, what is actually in these proposals? What are they saying
Yeah.
would be the context of this so-called state, And it's really important that people understand that it is, it is just a form of surrender,
Yeah.
essentially masked as a state recognition, which Israel is not going to agree to anyway. So,
Right.
then the question becomes, okay, is anybody going to militarily intervene to support
Yeah.
this state? Like,
Yeah.
if we haven't seen that in the, I mean,
Right.
Yemen will, like, but,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yemen.
it's tough.
Yemen.
All right. On that note, we can move to accountability. And like this has been a thing for me too that
Mm.
has been like kind of a journey. And I think, I mean, actually, I'll say some of it has to do with um I spent a lot of time, especially during the Black Lives Matter movement and all of that, like, reading these books on abolition and so on. And none to be clear, like most of the people in that world, they do have some notions of accountability frameworks. So I don't want to suggest that they don't, but there is a lot of kind of the accountability framework stuff within that world that it's kind of like, okay, well, we can all get together as a community and, we can like hear both sides of these things and we can come up with what the consequence could be, which like, actually that doesn't sound so bad,
Yeah.
right? Even in this case, like we could probably agree with that. But I think like the problem, a lot of the accountability rhetoric was always about, we need to hold police accountable and so on. And a lot of what that meant was that like, and I don't mean that activists or organizers meant this, and I think I understand their approach to it even better now. But what the state meant by it was like, okay, like we'll have the internal affairs like look into it, or in this context, you would say it's like all those Biden administration briefings where they would cite some horrendous war crimes, Hindra job, all
Yeah.
of them, and they would say, well, I don't know if that happened.
Right.
If it did, we trust that Israel will
Right.
look into it and like investigate, and that's their responsibility,
That's it.
kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we trust that they will do that. They're our ally and our partner,
Right.
like that kind of shit.
Ugh.
Um, and so, like the language of accountability is something that I had been kind of allergic to in some senses.
Yeah.
Not I mean, partly because I'm like, okay, I'm also interested in revolutionary politics and all of this. And I'm like, okay, well, we actually have to have power to enforce accountability. Like we have to have, a structure that we control where we can produce accountability. I still think that way.
Yeah.
But on the one of the things that actually I think was the first, I was at like an Al Auda conference, and people were like, no, like we want to prosecute Israelis for war crimes. And what do you think about that? And I mean, I was like, yeah, like I wasn't against it, but it was interesting to me because I was like, there's a there's an organizing orientation towards systems of justice that they know are stacked against them, but they're also like, we have to out organize these other forces in this realm. um and like I think I've kind like fully sort of come around on this perspective of I want the highest degree, and I don't care how carceral it is or how violent it is to people. Like, there
Yeah.
were hangings at Nuremberg,
Yep.
and rightfully so, and there should have been more,
Yep.
right? And like we could talk about all the ways that that structure, which was kind of like the basis of a lot of things, in this kind of international law, and how do we deal with the aftermath of genocide and these horrific wrongs. Like we could talk about all the ways that it fell short because so
Yeah.
many Nazis ended up right working in the West German state afterwards
Or at
as,
NASA.
yeah, or NASA, right, or the CIA,
Yeah.
um, or in all of our universities, and
Yeah.
yeah, and so on, right? So, like, there was not enough accountability for
Right.
all of that,
Right.
and I am just like, there's so many people
Yeah.
who are involved in this who, um, that we have to be able to hold accountable.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the things that I do think is super important about the work that you all are doing, documenting too, because there's so many crimes that these people are committing that are real crimes. This is not somebody stole a loaf of bread in order
No.
to eat, right? Like, we're not talking
Yeah.
about that kind of thing.
No.
It's not a capitalistic, like,
No.
orientation of, like, where we're producing a certain amount of criminality in order to enforce our class rule against poor and working class people. Like, that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about, like, what are we going to do collectively to build the structures and systems of accountability, even if it's like very clandestine or something. Like, it,
Yeah.
because this is a part of the world building, right? Like, it is of, like, we can't allow this stuff to just go unpunished.
No.
Like, and I don't mind, like, I don't like a language of punishment. I have all these issues with it, but they need punishment. These
Yeah.
people, like, yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I know this is a bit of a, like, tanky group therapy
Yeah, a
conversation to
little
end it,
bit.
but
I
like,
know, but it's
like,
good. It's good. I think we should all be thinking about this. I think it is, like you said, really important in terms of world building, in terms of revolutionary optimism, in terms of, working toward the world that we want to be in, which is a far cry from this one. And it's funny, like, uh, my spouse is an abolitionist, and like he's worked in prisons before, like doing writing workshops, especially for kids in the kid jails around here. And he's been a part of abolition networks and activist circles for a long time. And like early on in the genocide, I was like, I don't think I'm an abolitionist. And he was like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, all these people have to go somewhere. They all have to be in like a dungeon. They have to be like they have to go. We can't live in a world where these people get to just walk free and we have some sort of like community, restorative justice sort of framework applied to these genocidal freaks. And he's like, oh yeah, don't worry about that. He was like, abolition, most, and this is, I mean, I'm totally going to butcher what he said, but he was like, when abolitionists talk about no more prisons or abolishing the police, that's like when socialists talk about communism, right? It's like that's the end goal. That's the end.
100%.
We
Yeah.
live in the world that we are in now, and the people who are doing the crimes against humanity will be dealt with. They will be put in the most, horrific conditioned prison, because this is what they have brought upon themselves. These people will not go scot free. Don't worry. Like, we'll still have the Hague. Like, okay, good. But I know, in talking about like, what does accountability mean? I mean, there's like the AOC accountability
Right.
idea where she's like, I'm going to be in Congress to hold the centers of power accountable. And what does that mean? That means like capitulating and becoming like a, Pelosi herself. There's, accountability, I think, has become kind of like a just a empty word
I
in
want
that sense.
accountability for AOC at this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We all do. And we deserve it. But like, I think when we talk about accountability in real practical terms, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to start a new foundation. There's the Hind Rajab Foundation. This is a very sophisticated group of lawyers and legal experts and like, computer experts who are doing the work of tracking down every, Israeli military personnel who is involved in this genocide, and submitting dossiers to higher legal bodies. Um, and I think that's what real accountability is, that there are people who are already doing the work of creating files on these Nazis, in the hopes, in the belief, not hope, but in the belief, in the knowledge that they will be prosecuted for these crimes. And we had Nuremberg. Justin, I think, talked about this. Well, he wrote about it in an essay, but we talked about it again on Tanky Group Therapy. I think we're like, the Nuremberg trials that will come for the Israelis will be held in Hodeida, right, in Yemen. We have to keep creating, the image of the world that we want to be in, and that means, um, also creating the conditions for rightfully punishing those who are perpetrating this. So the Hind Rajab Foundation, I mean, there's, all these like internet sleuths putting together dossiers of these individual Israeli soldiers. Some of them are like so scared now to go, back to Canada after, sniping children in the head in Gaza for, 300 days of the Israeli army. They should be afraid. They should be very afraid. Um, and I think the more that we can support those kinds of organizations and do the work of helping to document these people who are going to, come back after sniping children in the head or torturing them to death, are going to try and like live normal lives. That's not the world I want to live in. So yeah, I mean, I think that's what accountability can mean.
Yeah, no, inshallah, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I would love to see the Hodeida Nuremberg or the Hodeida
Right.
trials.
Trust.
Yeah, yeah. And they would be broadcast on a big screen
Oh
too, and
man.
yeah.
Oh,
Um,
so good.
all right. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Anytime.
I have a couple of comments I'll pull up from the chat, but is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or whatever? This has been great.
No, yeah, I feel like I got a lot out that I needed to get out. I'm just so grateful for your show and for all the I mean, it's been a lifeline to be able to listen to this show in some of the, darkest times of the last 2 years, just to hear comrades, um, you know, really holding a mirror up to reality and just kind of helping us all articulate what we've all been feeling. And so thank you to millennials. And yeah, I and thank you to you, Jay, for being you and being a phenomenal host and carrier of these conversations. I'm just really grateful for this community.
Well, yeah, I mean, that makes me feel wonderful. So thank you. But I just would say, and not being whatever, like, I don't know, ungrateful or whatever, but it is very much reciprocal in terms of the
Thanks.
work that you do and that your colleagues do. And also because you're one of the creators of Tanky Group Therapy. You're one of the original, the
The
founders, right?
OGs.
And so
Yeah.
and so so thank you for that too, because that's
Yeah.
uh been huge. So
Good.
yeah, I mean,
Thanks.
I'm glad that we have outlets
Yeah.
like the ones that
Yeah.
you're involved in and this one,
Yeah.
because I don't know truly what I would do without them, as well
Same.
as others, many
Same.
others. But
Same.
yeah.
Exactly.
Um, I mean, I don't even listen to like Chapo Trap House, but I listened to like 6 minutes of it the other day, and
Yeah.
they were talking about the need for the Democrats to arm the Houthis, and I was like, "This is great that we're
I
in this
love it.
position." And they
That's
were
great.
like slamming
Come
Bernie and
so far.
AOC for being so. I was like,
Excellent.
"Wow, like what?
That's
Like
good.
what's going on over
It's a
there?"
good barometer
Um,
for where we're at
yeah,
in the
yeah.
left. Yeah.
All right. So somebody put a quote from
Oh, yeah.
Alex Karp on Palantir, which, by the way,
Oh,
check out if you didn't see it. The conversation that Jared Ball's been having some discussions about Palantir recently that are really
yeah.
good on Black Liberation Media, and I think actually on I Mix What I Like on his YouTube page there. But this is interesting just from one of our
That's it right
enemies
there.
saying that student protests are not a sideshow. This is the whole show. If we lose the intellectual battle, we will not be able to deploy armies anywhere in the West. And
There
wouldn't
it
it be
is.
wonderful if we could not deploy armies anywhere in the West?
Wow. It's
Or
amazing.
anywhere in the world. I guess he means anywhere from the West.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so somebody mentioned that this is the Zionists are putting out
Oh,
billboard
yep.
campaigns that the
Yeah.
starving children are actually people with cystic fibrosis.
Yeah.
Again, like I don't know how this is a W for them. Like,
No.
like, oh well, people are dying of, treatable conditions because they can't get medical care because we've blockaded it. Like,
Right. Yeah, it doesn't
but
help your case.
very happy to see
Great.
Nora on Mac. Bring on John Elmer next. We'll have to do that.
Agreed.
I really want to do a conversation with like John and Justin at some point.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Just another shout out to you. Somebody also mentioned this. So this was when I mentioned Cedric and Elizabeth Robinson. Their news show was called The Third World News Review, the one where they read like papers from all over the world to develop their stories and stuff like that, which is pretty
legendary.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So they referenced this. I just listened to like Chapo puts out, because I'm not a subscriber, but they put out like short clips to try to get people to subscribe to their Patreon. And it was like 6 minutes. And they referenced this as well. They were like the Pod Save America guys who are Obama speechwriters and like Biden folks are now like calling it a genocide at this point, I guess.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. If only we had been here, 19 months ago. But
yeah, exactly. Saying the same shit we were saying.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah. But hey, I'm glad that they're saying it. That's good.
Great.
People need to hear it. All right. Thank you so much. This has been, great. And I'm sure that I would love to have you on again.
I would love to come on.
And
again
it
too.
won't wait 9 years or 8 years until next time.
You're doing great.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you, Nora.